This one is for those of you who constantly doubt the media and keep on contemplating how little you can trust those who disseminate information to the general public. Because of the current catastrophe spurred on by open fascism and widely disseminated lies to an entire nation that doesn't have freedom of press, and if any dissidents get too mouthy, well, soon enough, their central nervous systems won't be able to move their mouths. Anyway, the people in the parts of the world where the war isn't raging are taking information from the sources they typically would, but everybody across the political spectrum is coming to realize how vital of a resource information is. On one hand, you have a totalitarian autocracy that won't make any effort whatsoever to lie to its people because it's constantly staging false flag operations, lying, being deceitful, poisoning people, genociding, kidnapping. On the other hand, there's Ukraine. More specifically, the dissident right in this country has constantly been emphasizing the fact that this war is propaganda to get ourselves to view this issue through one country's lens. They keep on ingeminating, "We can never truly trust what we're told because the information we're given always has a bias and sways to someone's narrative." Besides the fact that if one were to truly live by this sentiment, then they would have no one to trust. They're doing this in an attempt to make you adopt a highly contrarian, anti-establishment mindset so you believe Russia's narrative. Plain and simple. Some on the right wing, like Tucker, and many to the right of him, like puritanical pastors, Fuentes, and Tankies. Which is ironic, because I would have thought the pro-working class people would have hated poor kids being sent off to war and streams of revenue for so much of the proletariat being cut off so they're in a worse condition, but I'm not gonna act like conservatism isn't an ideology that fundamentally relies on contradictions. Nonetheless, there are two really important points I want to elaborate in this polemic-style shorter form video. One is this anti-establishment mindset deeply permeates throughout so many conservative circles, and not only those social networks, but more irrationally skeptical movements as well, such as New Age spiritualism, quantum mysticism, homeopathic treatment, astrology-based movements, and more spiritual-oriented mind and body movements in general. If you haven't seen Professor Dave's videos on these anti-establishment movements, go check them out. They're really good content, and having the lies of these groups debunked by someone who understands these people extremely well is really good content. One common feature of all these groups is that they have an almost visceral aversion to anything corroborated by mainstream science and institutions simply because it's mainstream. As you can already be led to realize, these people often exhibit conspiratorial thinking that most likely stems from New Age spiritualism of the 60s and 70s and the anti-establishment culture that came along with it. Because many felt that centralized institutions were up to no good and didn't have anyone's best interests in mind, this most likely made many of them to develop a sense of irrational skepticism, which has mostly died down since, but the movements that inherited it can still be easily found today. The reason I've grown really concerned about this kind of mentality is because many of these people can actually be found on the left of the political spectrum, and the ones on the right that adhere to this sort of thinking are the most extremist out there. There's no in between. This kind of skepticism is irrational because it blatantly ignores what is well-established empirical evidence reified by the most learned of experts in their respective fields. The blatantly irrational belief that established institutions are in some sort of conspiracy is the most subtle fear-mongering that could make someone go down the deepest and most extreme political rabbit hole one might witness. This obviously might inspire some inquiry in some skeptics of said skepticism. For instance, if some sort of New World Order wanted to trick the population into believing a lie, that would have to be coordinated to where a virtually unanimous group of experts were in lockstep, and them slipping up would have to be an almost infinitesimal occurrence despite the fact that frivolous attempts at debunking the realities presented to us by modern science have failed. The longer you talk to these people, the more you have to convince yourself what you're experiencing isn't a fever dream, because pretty soon into your conversations with them, you'll typically write your debunks off as something that's impossible to verify because of the Mossad agents backed by international banking cartels owned by the Rothschilds and blah blah blah. The typical drivel. To this day, I have no idea why they distrust the mainstream so much, but I feel like them wanting to be the people that are in on the truth makes them feel special in a way, and having something revealed to you that counters tradition is something that'll set them in their own communities apart from everyone else. Two is that you truly can't trust anything because we never truly know anything, and we can never truly know whether the information that's given to us is accurate or not. When you're recollecting an experience to someone and you're trying to do it as honestly as possible, even then, you're not going to know that you're interpolating, exaggerating, forgetting, embellishing, and doing what every other storyteller has done throughout the course of narratives constructed by humans. Moreover, just because you're doubtful of what mainstream news news sources say about something doesn't mean alternative sources are right about what they say. As a matter of fact, alternative news sources are typically more biased than those of the mainstream, which really gives me I like to do my own research vibes. Keep in mind, this always means watching an Alex Jones stream instead of reading the double-blind peer-reviewed studies. Really intellectual stuff. Anyway, even journalists whose profession it is to disseminate news run into this problem as well, with virtually every story. There's always going to be someone's bias when any news is presented unless you have non-stop camera footage of every event that occurs in the described situation, and even then, cameras have trouble depicting what's actually there. Footage could have been edited, they could have recorded at a non-vital moment, the list goes on. Russia's invasion of a sovereign nation is reprehensible, adjacent to overt dictator lovers keep on implying that mainstream media has a narrative to spin, and that we can't trust anyone. But aren't you media? Everyone's perspective skews one way or another, and to get an accurate depiction of how reality is, instead of going to all these news sources to piece one succinct story together. By the way, the people that say they do that don't and just watch Tucker. I go to the agencies that have established themselves as trustworthy, such as the AP and Reuters. So if you hear anybody saying, this war is propaganda, and we can't believe anyone because they're all biased, just say to them, aren't you as well?